Hello, I'm Rabbi Michael Lotker, and my goal in this brief video is to give you an understanding of the key elements of a Jewish wedding. I have a little PowerPoint to share with you, and we'll jump to that right now and begin the PowerPoint. So the key elements and practices in Judaism relating to weddings. It may surprise you that weddings are not detailed at all in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, much of what we practice for the last 2,000 years in Judaism has its root or seeds in the Hebrew Bible, but all the details are in the Talmud. In a way, the Talmud is like our New Testament, except it's much larger and much, much, much more complicated. So the Hebrew Bible is silent regarding ceremonies. There is marriage mentioned 7 times in the Hebrew Bible. You hear the phrase when a man takes a woman to be his wife, but there's no rules about any of the elements of a wedding. All of that is contained in the Talmud. There is mention in the Hebrew Bible of divorce, but once again, the details are going to be spelled out in the Talmud. There are 2 parts to a modern Jewish wedding. Part number 1 is called Kushin, which literally means holiness or sanctification. It's basically an engagement or a betrothal. The groom gives the bride a ring. Traditionally, it looks very simple, like the one I'm holding up here, my own wedding ring. And he pronounces a statement in the Talmud which says, by means of this ring, you are sanctified to me, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. And the reason the ring is simple is so that the bride knows what she's getting. Ultimately, in a sense, she is being acquired with the ring, and so she has to know what she's getting in exchange. So it's supposedly a simple ring. The marriage itself is affected by 7 wedding blessings called the Sheva Brachot. And this then is followed by a brief period in which they are alone together with each other. More on that in a little bit. And so this fulfills the requirements specified in the Talmud. A gift, a contract. The contract we'll see in a moment is called a Katuba, and cohabitation. So there are lots of symbols that people are familiar with relating to a Jewish wedding. There is the chuppah, a marriage canopy that the bride and groom stand under. It's often made with a talit or other beautiful cloth, and it's open so that it symbolizes what we hope will be the openness of their house, open to friends and family. The ring, I mentioned, is round, it's continuous, and it also has a clear value. In both the engagement part and the wedding part, there is a cup of wine. So we have 2 cups of wine total, symbolizes their sharing a common destiny, and sweet wine indicating, representing the sweetness of marriage. The Katuba, we're going to talk more about later, is an ancient document, actually in Aramaic, not in Hebrew traditionally, which basically spells out the legal arrangement with which they are entering. Again, more on that in a few moments, largely to protect the economic interests of the bride. And then breaking a glass at the end of the ceremony. The origin is probably pre-Judaic. It probably dates back to pagan times when people believed that there were evil spirits lurking around happy moments. Now the rabbis made that Jewish to symbolize that there is still brokenness in the world. So here's a beautiful chuppah, and we can see the groom is about to break the glass. Sometimes you will see parents at either side of the chuppah, and a rabbi and a cantor perhaps officiating at the ceremony. This is actually the chuppah that I own. It's actually very simple. This one's been decorated with lots of flowers, and here is a very large talit or prayer shawl that covers the chuppah. And underneath, we always have a small table, and typically on the table, we'll see the wine bottle with 2 glasses, 2 Kiddush cups for the wedding, and a glass that we are going to break at the conclusion of the wedding. So here's an image of a beautiful ketubah that the couple has selected. And here's what happens typically, or I should say often, right before the wedding, the couple will be signing the ketubah. It's actually not traditional for the couple to sign the ketubah. Traditionally, only the two witnesses sign the ketubah. But in modern ketubot, we have the bride, the groom, two witnesses, and the rabbi signing the ketubah. And here is my son signing his ketubah at his own wedding. And there's my own chuppah in the background and a younger yours truly who's officiating at the ceremony. So this is an actual translation of an Aramaic ketubah. And I'll just highlight a few items on it. It talks about how the groom promises to work, honor, feed, and support the bride in the custom of Jewish men. And he promises a certain number of zuzim, a Babylonian currency, for her food, clothing, necessities of life. He promises conjugal needs to be available to her sexually according to custom. And she, the bride, agreed, and it specifies the dowry that she brings into the relationship and how much he brings into the relationship. And then more legal language that spells out the amount of money that he will pay her if, God forbid, the marriage would dissolve in the future. And it describes the kind of property and that she has a security interest in his property, even to the shirt on his back during his lifetime and even after his lifetime. There is nothing romantic or lovey-dovey about a traditional ketubah, and I've never seen it correctly translated on a document in the traditional ketubah. And as I said, there's two witnesses that would be signing it. So one of the problems that we see in a ketubah in Jewish law is that only the groom can grant a divorce to the wife. So you have a situation where women can be literally chained in that the groom refuses to grant the divorce to the wife, even though they may have a civil divorce. So she is bound and she can't remarry under Jewish law. So the conservative movement solved this problem with something called the Lieberman Clause, which basically says the groom agrees to grant her a religious divorce if they have a civil divorce. I also have what I will call a reformed ketubah. So there's some very simple Hebrew, and here's a good translation of the Hebrew. It has the date, the names in Hebrew and English of the bride and the groom, and basically say that the couple said, "Be sanctified to me as my wife or husband, according to the laws of Moses and Israel, and I will love, honor, and respect you and provide for you and sustain you as is proper." And they entered into the sacred rite of marriage. And as you can see at the bottom, there's room for the bride and groom to sign and for witnesses to sign and the rabbi to sign. These days, I would say 99% of my weddings are with modern ketubot. And so there's a website. There are lots of websites. The one that I often see my couples going to is simply called katuba.com. And they will allow you to select any Hebrew language, any English language, any artwork. So quite often they have what I will sort of euphemistically call a lovey-dovey ketubah, which talks about, well, you can glance at the text, promising to be respectful and so on. So this would be a pretty standard lovey-dovey section. There would also be a section identifying the dates and the names. Here is one that is actually created for same-gender marriage. And so instead of it saying bride and groom, it says beloved and ahuv, which would be the masculine version of the beloved. And then here is one that's actually specifically geared toward an interfaith couple, which talks about being an inspiration to each other, mutual respect, and in essence, respecting each other's customs and traditions. None of these would be considered traditional under standard Jewish law. The wedding, once the bride and groom reach the chuppah, there is a wonderful tradition. It's actually an Ashkenazi or Eastern European tradition of the bride circling the groom 7 times. And marriage is mentioned 7 times in the Hebrew Bible. One of the prophets speaks of the bride making a protective circle around her husband. And I often like to comment that just as God created the universe in 7 circuits, so too this couple creates their own universe with 7 circuits. If they want to take a more egalitarian approach, the bride can circle the groom 3 times, the groom can circle the bride 3 times, and they can circle each other once, or any combination thereof. I mentioned that there are glasses of wine for the first part of the wedding, Kiddushin, the betrothal, and the second part, Nisuin, the actual wedding itself. And the rings, again, you can see what are traditional Jewish rings, and the groom's statement, which is, behold, you are consecrated to me, consecrated or sanctified, holy to me with this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. And when I conduct a wedding, we do it with the groom, word for word, hare, the groom says hare, at, groom says at. So there's no nervousness, there's nothing for the groom to have to remember. Sometimes the bride will make the same statement, or sometimes a slightly different statement from the Bible. So here we are, and the wedding itself is going to be with 7 wedding blessings, and typically I have the bride and groom facing each other, so it's easy for them to face each other, to look at me as appropriate, and to glance at their guests as appropriate. So there are 7 wedding blessings that are traditional, and these are pretty literal translations of the 7 blessings. The first one for the wine, the second one praising God who created everything, the third praising God, the creator of human beings, fashioning us in God's image. Let's see, the 5th one, talking about joy and exaltation through the gathering of her children in Jerusalem. Blessed are you, the one who gladdens Zion or Israel through a children's return. The 6th one, referring back to the Garden of Eden. And the 7th one, which is sometimes very well known by many of Jews attending, praising God who creates joy and gladness, loving couples, mirth, glad, song, pleasure, delight, love, loving communities, peace, and companionship. May there always be heard in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem the sound of joy and the sound of gladness, the voice of the loving couple from their canopies, and the joy of the young people at their feasts. So those are the traditional 7 blessings. My approach to this is I chant them in Hebrew, I chant them in English, and then the entire community responds by saying Amen. The word Amen comes from the Hebrew word emunah, which means faith. By saying Amen at the end of the blessing, you add your faith to that of the blessing. And I mentioned the breaking of the glass. So simple glass. I used to rely on couples to bring their own glass, and people would bring heavy glasses and even compact fluorescent light bulbs. So now I go to the great expense of $1 or $2 and buy glasses very much like the one you see right here, which are easy to break. And then there are companies you will find on the internet that can take the shards of what you've broken and reconstruct them somehow to make a memento. Sometimes they will have beautiful colored glass and they make a mezuzah out of it. So there's lots of ways you have already discovered of spending money on your wedding. And there's a happy couple. So this happens to be me and my bride, Sonia. And Sonia is from Casablanca, Morocco. So she is wearing a traditional Moroccan wedding outfit here. And I think I mentioned there is a tradition, actually is a recognition of common law marriage in Judaism. So if a Jewish couple lives together in the eyes of the community, this doesn't mean sneaking off to Motel 6, but really living together. They are actually married, according to some Jewish legal experts, according to Jewish law. So we do this symbolically by having them have a few moments alone right after the wedding, 5-10 minutes, and then the party begins. So just to cover a few of the interesting and important marriage laws. Marriage is traditionally not performed on Shabbat. Technically, what's going on is a legal act. The groom is acquiring the bride, and the Katuba is being signed. So there's legal things taking place that doesn't happen on Shabbat. There's also a tradition of not combining joys, combining the joy of the Sabbath with the joy of a wedding. I actually don't look at a wedding as being a legal act of acquisition with the groom acquiring the bride. And I think the more joy, the merrier. So I am very flexible about a marriage on Shabbat. Interfaith marriage is absolutely forbidden in Jewish tradition and forbidden by the conservative and Orthodox movements. It's actually frowned upon even officially in the Reform movement, but Reform rabbis are allowed to officiate at interfaith marriages, and most do, and I do. Many rabbis require some kind of a commitment to establish a Jewish home. That's not something I personally require. And some rabbis, including me, will work with non-Jewish clergy to make a marriage that will please both sides of the family. My idea here, my goal here is you two, this couple is getting married, irrespective of what the rabbi says. I want to make the couple feel welcome by Judaism and have a good feeling about their Jewish marriage. The interfaith couple may have problems in conservative and Orthodoxy as to their status and standing. They are generally welcomed in the Reform world, and there's quite often specific programs for interfaith couples in the Reform world. And there's always this question of how you're going to raise the children. And I will work with couples on addressing that question. More recently comes the issue of same-gender marriage. And it's interesting, the very first couple that I joined under a chuppah after I was ordained as a rabbi were two men. And I would say virtually all Reform rabbis will officiate at same-gender ceremonies. So here's two men being joined under a chuppah. Here are two women being joined under a chuppah. Divorce, I mentioned, is actually mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, and traditionally, the husband grants the wife a get, a Jewish divorce. A woman may be unable to marry in a conservative or Orthodox setting without a get. So this gives the groom a lot of power in negotiating the terms of their civil divorce, and there are ways of handling that. In the conservative movement, there is a Lieberman clause, which I mentioned, and in the Reform movement, Reform Judaism accepts a civil divorce as a religious divorce, so there's no issue about remarrying. And so I wish all couples, I have had the honor of officiating at about 200 weddings, and it is a great joy for me and a great honor for me to participate with you in your marriage. And I look forward to doing so. And we'll stop the sharing. And thank you for your attention, and take care.